that are used to work as they did in the past, without having a view on the fairness of data. And we have, first of all, to build a community around fair data, around open science, first of all. And yeah, I think that, as yesterday a lot of different speakers said, it's very important having a training platform on these topics, because otherwise, if we do not teach to the newcomers how to deal with fairness and openness, we are in a trouble.
Mm. Shalini, I mean, you worked on cultural change, you said, so do you want to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely, Nicholas. So I also have I had the opportunity to work in two completely different cultures as well. So I used to work in the Netherlands, and now I work in Italy. And regarding cultural changes, I think what we've noticed is that we need both top-down and bottom-up approaches. So we do have, and Netherlands is a very good example of that. For instance, in the beginning, it was a lot of grassroots going and creating awareness, having road shows, trying to provide training, raising awareness. At the same time, even the top brass also said open science is important. We need to do this. So there's a strong message from both ends, and that I think works really well. And what I see in Italy is more. There's more. I think there's a lot of effort also happening in the raising awareness side, but still the policies are, especially what are the rewards that I'm going to get if I have to, pursue open science. It's still very unclear. And just a very funny anecdote, when I had to apply for a job on open science, the thing they asked me was, what is your H-index? So if, so the cultural change is not necessarily, it has to come from everywhere, I think, and we just can't rely on just one side, and we need to, both sides need to meet. That would be my opinion.
We have a couple of people who haven't commented yet. So Rosie, Dieta, Aston.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So I'm with the Australian Research Data Commons, and we're a national e-research infrastructure. And I think, just echoing the last comment, to be most effective, we need all points in the system, all of the levers to be pulling in the right direction. So here we're looking at what are the policies. So for instance, the code of conduct for research that's published here in Australia, requiring the fair data as a result of research investments. At the same time, ARDC is directly incentivizing cross disciplines and across domains, particularly that's somewhat smaller, incentivizing them by providing seed funding to create national data assets available to researchers for reuse. So those are just two examples, but it's about bringing all of these levers to bear that I think really reflects the comments around the bottom up and top down.
Okay, thanks. It's a good comment. Anyone else who would like to comment? I don't know, from the Commission, or Dieta or Vasu haven't said anything yet, or Georgia? Maybe Vasu can go first.
Sorry, I missed some part of the meeting and I just joined a few minutes ago, so I don't have something to add at the moment.
Okay. I'll try again with Dieta. I know you're struggling with your sound, which is it's a challenge. We can see you, but we can't quite hear you yet. I'm sorry for that. If you have anything, please put it on the chat and we'll try to monitor as we are progressing. Can I ask something else? Another important part of FAIR, I mean, we're doing this to increase the value of the research assets for the whole community. Otherwise, what would be the point of FAIR? So do you feel you have enough good examples across field of reuse of data and how that is generating interesting science to be able to sort of promote and drive the cultural change? Hard question. John, can I point at you to get started on that one?
I didn't understand whether you have been asking me to start, but
yeah, I was saying, so I mean, part of the culture change and the argument is to have demonstrated reuse. I mean, we're doing FAIR data with a focus on the R, the reusability, don't we? And do we feel that we have good examples of the scientific value of the reused data that we can use to promote the concept?
Actually, as said, at the moment, I do not have any examples from, let's say, from the recent past, but in times where computer resources were scarce and where the efficiency of computers was not such big, and we were happy about each calculation which we successfully finished. There were several attempts to create databases on calculated properties of molecular systems, so chemical systems. And these databases are now still alive, and in some sense they are made FAIR as they are combined with results of spectroscopical measurements. And in that sense, you have a kind of interoperability between domains. And then for sure, going through those databases, you certainly can speak about reuse of those data, because you simply do not repeat the calculations if the things are done properly with the methods you are standardly routinely using. So it has some effect. Even so, with the increasing computer power, this does not become very pronounced. But it's an example from let's say very old past.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting example. I'll take the opportunity to hog the airwaves for a second, because from my past when I worked for a pharmaceutical company, we did exactly the same. So of course all measured values for all compounds were available within the company for reuse, and we had routine calculations that predicted values for any new compound that we wanted to synthesize based on all the data that we had so far, and the models were updated essentially a couple of times a week to make sure they were always up to date on the data. So I'm firmly convinced that the examples are there. We just need to find them within the field and help to broadcast them to demonstrate why this is important. Rosie, you put something on the chat on COVID-19, which I thought was a really interesting point.
Well, when we have people in a very strict lockdown, I don't know if you've heard in Melbourne, it has continued for an extended period of time. We have some of our universities not opening up labs for months to come, and working with our national research infrastructures. So for instance, Microscopy Australia as an example, or the Astronomy Australia, enabling researchers to continue doing good work by reusing data sets that are being curated by the research infrastructures themselves. It's really wonderful to see that this is what people are focusing on right now, because it allows them to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really nice example. Any anyone who would want to add? Say Costas and Carlos from the Commission, would you like to intervene?
Okay, I can say something about, if you want, I mean, what is being discussed till now is, let's say, the bottom-up approach, as somebody said at the beginning. But of course, the making your data fair or other people's data fair is very laborious. It can be a lot of work depending on the area. And it will be very difficult to accomplish this without also a system that incentivizes fairness of data. And incentivizing means that it counts for your career. It means that data sets that you have made fair and you share with others is like a publication, sometimes even more weight than a publication. So one needs to put in place the system that provides these incentives and rewards of researchers. And this is a task primarily for organizations, for institutions, for the also for those represented here. So to what extent is the management of the organization asking its employees to produce only such data? It is, I mean, I have talked to a number of people in the past. It is very laborious. It can be, not always, but it can be a lot of effort. Therefore, it's not going to happen entirely unless either the system provides significant incentives, or we arrive at some point many years later where it's considered unethical to produce research data that nobody else can find. Unethical, I mean it in the sense that not complying with the codes of integrity. If you look at the codes of integrity of ALEA, for instance, the European academies, open science is and the openness of data is included somewhere there, but it's not made very explicit on what this implies. This links also to the big issue of reproducibility of research, because we have in the Commission started to pay more and more attention to this, as we have signals. I mean, you have probably know the publications that it's an enormous waste of public resources. The percentage of research research conclusions, results that cannot be reproduced, and therefore are either wrong or cast with doubt, is very significant, and the budget that corresponds to this research is very, very significant. Very often, one of the reasons that you cannot reproduce it is that you cannot reuse the data to try out whether you will come to the same conclusions. So training is extremely important, as it was said earlier. The curricula need to include these aspects in the future. Maybe training at PhD level should have an obligatory course on fair data in several of the disciplines that are data intensive, but also top-down policies from the organizations will be very important.
Yeah, no, those are all good points. I like to make an addition as well. I mean, I gave a talk earlier today where I talked about the COVID-19 data portal and platform, and we would simply not have been able to publish all of that data if it wasn't for researchers that over decades have built up both the sort of community norm of depositing biomolecular data in the big archives, and all the investments both into the archives and into metadata standards that make it possible to bring together and then take a slice out of all of these databases that pertain to coronavirus or to the COVID-19 disease. So I think that's a testament, and we do see significant reuse. I mean, it's now being pulled down by workflows and researchers in countries all across Europe. So I think if the data is there and if we equip the researchers, and I liked your intervention, Rosie, if we equip the researchers with the ability to actually do something with the data, sooner or later someone will do something really clever, because that's how research works. So I think that in sort of innovation enablement, we just have to make sure we build a good catalog of examples for to sustain sort of the culture change and sustain the investments that are needed. Shalini, you are putting something on the chat, so if you want to comment, please.
No, actually, Nicholas, I had an example because you were asking for examples of data reuse, and I just want to also echo the comments of the previous speakers. There's a big misconception is open or fair data is free. This is one of the biggest reasons there's a lot of issues regarding reuse. And I have a very good example. It's called the Cambridge, I don't know if you've heard about, it's the Cambridge Structural Database. I'm going to share this with you right here. So it is actually a very highly curated database, and they do have several access options. For researchers, it could be free. For enterprises, they need to pay a license. So I think we also need to think about these kind of models when we talk about reuse. It's not free for everybody, but there are conditions apply. So this awareness, I think, is also not widespread.
Mm-hmm. So the differentiation between fair data and open data is an important one for you.
Yes, and it's not free data. It's very important to insist that it's not free data. There's a lot of work going on in the curation and making it available. So making it fair also means that there is a price tag on it, and who pays for it is a different, of course, it's an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but it always comes down to who pays for it.
Yeah. No, but I think that's an important part of the culture bit, isn't it? Because I mean, open data and the open science is a policy. And I'm sure Costas and Carlos, you will be able to tell us in more detail, but it comes at a policy cost. As you said, it can be quite cumbersome and quite expensive. And so therefore, I think we also need to make sure that we capture the policy benefit. What is the value we're getting out of the open fair data? Because otherwise it would be very hard to sustain. And I guess that's going to be part of this whole culture shift.
Yeah, if you want me to comment on this, Nicholas, we have a very clear policy on that, that the data that are produced with public money in Europe should be open, meaning free. Fair doesn't mean free, but open in our vocabulary, but of course you can define it differently. But in our vocabulary, it means free. Unless there are good reasons not to be free. So if the data are produced with public money, data that are produced by a company or by private funding to a university or whatever, these of course do not need to be free, but the ones paid with taxpayers' money need to be free, and to have the Open Science Commons for sharing this data with everybody, which then the issue there is reciprocity. That's very widely discussed with other countries around the world. But okay, that's a separate issue. But for us, open is free if produced with public funds.
Yeah, I like that statement, but you know I would say that. Rosie?
I think there's another reason to distinguish between open and fair that we're finding to be very important. And that's the case of sensitive data. So we're not concerned in the first instance here with the cost of access, but the need, for instance, in health research to ensure the privacy of some of the data.
Well, that's a good point. But actually, I think also sensitive data can be open in the spirit that Costas talked about, which is essentially it's public funding, right? So it should be equitable access for everyone in the community. So you're not.
I agree.
It's a common good.
Yeah, I agree, but I think that for us here in Australia, talking about fair data is extremely powerful in reassuring people that we're talking actually about open as possible, closed as necessary, but it's much faster to say accessible. And it's the fair data agenda is much stronger for us because it conveys the intent very, very nicely. That health and medical research is just one example that's very easy for people to understand. But the issues of sensitive data cover many facets of life. So, for example, tracking our tap-on bus tickets, to examine where people are traveling to look at, again, at the moment, the possibilities of infection through COVID. But we're talking there about whether someone's caught a bus or not, and having the ability to interrogate data in a way that makes people feel we have the appropriate governance. That's an extremely important contribution of the FAIR agenda.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I know from genomics, which is the field I'm working in, that people are heavily reusing also personal data and with insecure access. So, for instance, the EGA archive is shipping out close to 200 terabytes of data every month to users across Europe. And I think one of the nicest examples there, I think, is the UK Biobank, which have conditions that, so when they have a new release, they time the key to the lock, so you can only unlock the data at a specific time. And that's to make sure that also researchers at smaller institutions that don't have the same bandwidth are not disadvantaged. So you get the time to download the data set and think about analysis. And then essentially everyone gets access to the data at the same time, which I think is actually, it's a really nice and well thought through way of sort of leveling the playing field. And I guess that's what you were after, Kostas, then publicly funded data is a common good for the whole community. I see, Vasso, you haven't said anything so far. I see you put a comment on the chat. I don't know if you would like to add to the discussion.
I just think I just agreed that it's very important to, I mean, together with training, to have some top-down policies. And I also agree very much with the comment that we need to incentivize. So make sure that rewards are provided together with the training.
Thank you. In the last couple of minutes, I think we have another 5-6 minutes or so before we are pulled back. Can I ask if you have any good examples of policies or effective policies? Anything you would like to share that can be learned from your field in other fields? And I think I'll just go a round table with maybe a few closing remarks as well.
Let me again start, because I am sufficiently ignorant to speak about topics I have just very limited knowledge of. But in Czech, we have a very unique situation that all publicly funded research results are available in a central database. And one would assume that the move towards open data policy, where this would be just an extension or let's say an umbrella to this database, because the principles must in principle be here already, simply didn't work. And after a quite intense policy discussion, we decided to take a break before we introduce similar policy which we already have on open publications to open data. And the reason is very simple, that our system is very much based on competitive funding, and in principle you can trace back the money a certain research performing organization is receiving centrally from the government through the ministries, back to the number and quality of publications you're producing within a given time period. And if you would use the same policy or methodology for open data sets, respectively fair or not, which is another issue in Czech, you simply would recognize that deeper insight is needed in order to prevent gaming. because once you really strictly link the research results to money, then you have to be very careful not to negatively influence the entire system and distort the behavior. It's pretty close to integrity also, but we have, after 15 years doing that, very, very bad experience in several cases.
That's interesting insight, John, quite valuable. Can I also say that normally in Zoom you can raise your hand. I can't in this breakout room see the participant list, so if you want to say something, you better speak up, because I won't see any raised hands. But we have only a few,
Nicholas?
Oh, we have another 15 minutes actually, so I'll take a round table if people want to contribute. Georgia,
Nicholas,
please.
can you hear me?
Yes.
We have 3 raised hands. It's Marco Galeotti, Salini Kurapati, and Carlos Casaran.
Ah, perfect. Thank you, Georgia. Much appreciated. So maybe Marco, please, then first.
Yes, thank you, Nicholas. No, I would like just to underline what Vasso have said about the combination of training and rewards, because I think that is the fundamental mean to build and shape a community around fair and open principles, and to pave the way for a sustainable and valuable EOSC with a strong social and economic impact. We in Italy, we are thinking about how to reward researchers, but it's not so easy, and I hope that something will come up from the community, but is truly relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you give an example of training that you think have been effective, both within and across communities?
Yes. For example, we have a lot of research, in particular in the SSH community, there that are not so keen with digital tools, or they are simply not aware of what is already in place and what instruments could be used to go fair. And it could be very important to have training courses to teach how to use these new tools, and to motivate also. For example, speaking about the fact that go fair, go open, open the door to the use of data with a huge importance for the community. But a very simple example, I, with my colleagues, recently realized the catalog of services for ERIS, and we have published the catalog very recently. And we have struggled a lot with the user experience, for example, because some researchers from the humanities thought that there was a little bit difficult to put together all the necessary for submitting a proposal for transnational access to our facilities. And so I think that we have, because multidisciplinarity, the fertilization that we could have from cross co-creation of knowledge, it's huge. It's the future for sure, but we have to deal with all the problems that came up or will come up with this effort.
Okay, thanks. That's a really good example. So thanks a lot. I see Carlos have raised his hand as well, please, and Shalini. So Carlos, please.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly touch upon some comments that Kostas made earlier about the need for rewards and incentives. and tie those remarks to remarks that I've recently heard you make, Nicholas, and which I fully subscribe on the need to strike a balance between engaging and delivering. And I think with the FAIR principles, that there still does seem to be quite a bit of effort that needs to be done to ensure that the FAIR principles are mainstreamed and that awareness is raised. And that's only part of the picture. The other part of the picture is on creating the right mechanisms, technical implementations to ensure that aspects like the interoperability of data actually happen. So there's a balance between the raising awareness and the technical implementation that needs to happen. And this is, I think, where the research infrastructures can help by providing added value services and downstream applications on shared data to really capitalize on the interoperability and be able to have reusable data. So the two sides of that coin.
No, I like that. And I think, I mean, the fact that people see how data reuse is driving interesting science in itself drives the willingness to submit more data into the common pool, so to say. Shalini, please.
No, I just have a quick remark and probably a question to Kostas or to the Commission itself. Like, so we're giving it could be that we're giving two conflicting messages to researchers because there are a lot of expectations on them. So we say that with publicly funded money, you need to make your data open. At the same time, especially in the engineering and science and technology universities, I cannot speak for other universities, there's a lot of focus on technology transfer, valorization, and innovation, where by default, data could be fair but not open. So they're expected to do both, and the Commission expects both. So what message are we going to give? It's more of an open question.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, it is by default open unless there are good reasons not to be open. So the dictum is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. And so there are several reasons. You or somebody else mentioned other examples earlier, that they may have to be closed. So for example, personal data, if indeed such a reason exists, because personal data sometimes are used as an excuse for not opening the data without really needing the data to be closed. The commercial exploitation is another reason. And there are also other issues that have to do with national security and so on. These are all listed or explained in the documentation that we'll produce. And that has been produced actually in the context of Horizon Europe, and that will produce in more detail the guidelines. So yes, for commercial exploitation, you can close up the data. If you intend to have a patent, for instance, and there are critical data pieces that you don't want to reveal, of course, this is a good reason to do it, to close it up, which doesn't mean that they shouldn't be fair.
Oh,
So
no,
they
no,
can be fair.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
that was one of the cultural changes, especially from engineering and technology. It's very difficult for us to utter the word open. It's like a very feared upon word.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So in the last couple of minutes, I think you mentioned it, Kostas, the reciprocity with other parts of the world. And I think that's an interesting one to explore. Partly because I think one of the biggest values from the open and fair data is possibly the people that we are training, and they remain in the European universities and their abilities to use data from across the world. But it'd be interesting to hear people's view on this reciprocity around open and fair data. I don't know, Kostas, do you want to start, and then perhaps others want to comment?
Yeah, on this one, it's a question for me also. I don't know what the best approach is, but the issue is that on the one hand, you want to consider that science commons should be available for the use of humanity, so to speak, for the good of science, for the progress of humanity, and so on. On the other hand, you cannot be naive. In other words, if, let's say, for the sake of argument, it was only Europe, which is not the case, of course, but if it was to be only Europe that's opening up its data and publications and software and whatever else, and nobody else in the world does, then it's a bit naive. One should use this as a negotiating point in order to convince others that this is the best approach. and not open everything up front. So it is these two contradicting arguments that are both valid, that there is an optimum somewhere in between, and I'm not sure where the optimum is exactly. But the question is, how do you trade off one versus the other so that you have a maximum number of countries or jurisdictions opening up their science outputs? And here I'm not talking about so much about the developing world, which produces relatively small amounts of data and for which everybody agrees that as much scientific knowledge as possible should be made available openly to them, but more about the medium developed or the well-developed economies.
Yeah, I see John raising his hand, so please, John.
Yeah, just a brief comment on a very similar line. I mean, in the beginning, when starting to speak about the European Open Science Cloud, one of the arguments was, and this is pretty close to that what Kostas just said, that it will be a regulated and protected environment, contrary to all the other, let's say, semi-commercial or commercial environments where you certainly do not know, or not know how your data is treated, who has access to that, and so on. But this argument we have been using in the beginning is somehow gone now. So I have not heard much about this, let's say, restrictive openness to those who do not, on reciprocity, provide access to their data. Is there a change, or is it just, you know, not so much articulated because other issues became more prominent and actual? Kostas, please.
No, it is not. It is very very relevant, and you will see more about this in the coming year, because in the coming year we'll start negotiating the association agreements to the framework program, as well as agreements with other third countries around Europe on cooperation. So in that context, we'll have to seek reciprocity. Now, how far we go in seeking reciprocity and how we monitor this after that, it's an open question. As I said before, I'm not sure myself where the optimum, let's say, is. Restricting access through EOSC, for example, to some countries, I'm not sure it's going to be very effective. I mean, there are ways to overcome this. I mean, a country that's determined to get access to some data can go through another country that has access. Is quite easy, technically, I mean. So I'm not sure it's so effective. What we want is really to have a good incentives, as the previous discussion, good incentives that countries realize the benefits of subscribing to this approach of open science commons.
I think that's a really interesting notion, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the sort of power, as you say, John, around the branding and being part of EOSC can bring. When we say that we value open data as part of the EOSC. We know in Elixir, where we've done sort of a ranking of what we call core data resources, so nominated the most important reference databases within the field, that has enabled us to have conversations with funders who previously demanded co-payment from industry to move to a completely open model of the data, and then that has triggered instead a different collaboration with industry from the groups and the resource owners working with the data resources. So instead they are trying to encourage innovation on top of open data resources, and so that becomes more of research collaborations than payment for a data item. So I think that's a really interesting sort of transfer, and also move in a way the relationship up the value chain, which is a good thing. We only have 1 or 2 minutes. I see Georgia is giving us a heads up that we will be moved back. So I don't know if there's any closing remarks that people would want to make. Any additions? Marco and Shalini, you have your hands raised, but I don't know if that's a...
No, I think I should lower my hand. That was a long time back.
So is there any closing remarks that people would like to make? If not, then thanks a lot for contributing. I really enjoyed this. It was a wide-ranging conversation, but I think we managed to get a little bit around the core question. And,
yeah, me too.
So I think Claudia and I have the task now in a minute and a half trying to summarize this into a crisp summary. So you will see in plenary how well we do with that. But if you have any further comments or additions, then let me know now. Otherwise, thanks.
Just a technical question to Georgia. Do we need to do something, or will be automatically transferred to the next session?
No, please do not leave the room. We will now close the room or in a few minutes, and then you will be automatically transferred, as you very well said. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well then, I think it's just a thank you to everyone for contributing, and we'll soon be sipped back into the main plenary. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Niklas.
Thank you, Niklas. Thank you all.
breakout session. Good. Bitte?